Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Dan Taylor, fresh off the airplane from St. Paul, Minnesota. He is here today to talk about the history of Barton, Vermont, and some of its earliest settlers. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Great. Thanks for having me back on your show, Scott.
So you came way from St. Paul just to be on this show.
Just to be on the show.
And it wasn't anything to do with you were coming over to visit your parents.
Not at all. Not at all. But my folks still live in Barton, and
Right.
well, you know me. I'm all about Barton and Barton's history. So.
Yeah, when I visit you in St. Paul, I get to learn about Barton history because your house is decorated in Barton.
I have maps of Barton and pictures of Barton. Yes, you're right.
And your wife has no connection to Barton other than having blood running through your sons.
That's right.
From Barton.
That's right. Well, we come back every year for that very reason. I want my boys to know where they came from.
Right. Now, I said it was some of the earliest settlers, but it's actually some of the earliest photos.
Right.
But I guess those two are intermingled.
I think so too. What I wanted to share with you and your viewers today was a little bit of the history of Barton, and in particular, one of its most prominent citizens of the last century. His name was Joseph Webster. Right. He was a successful businessman for over 50 years in Barton. Okay. He started out as the first town photographer, so we have some of the earliest photos of Barton ever made from him, and then he went into the insurance business and was very successful.
Now, is that the big sign you have on your wall?
Yeah,
that's what I thought. Now, what does the sign say?
It just is his name. In fact, I have an image of
just
that I'll show you. Yeah,
right.
So Joseph Webster was not a native of Barton. He was a transplant from Irisburg. So he came to Barton in about 1860. He grew up on the farm in Irisburg. He was the oldest child, but in 1860 he moved to Barton to work in the Walter Hayward chair manufacturing company. He was a wood turner. You know what a wood turner is?
Well, I can kind of, has something to do with a lathe, does it?
Yeah, exactly. So he would make the spindles for the chairs and the legs and turn on the lathe. But when the Civil War broke out, he was living in Barton, so he enlisted into the 15th Vermont Regiment and went off to war in 1862.
If I recall right, didn't you publish an article on him in my Northland journal?
I did an article on Ellery Webster, who was J.N. or Joseph Webster's younger brother.
Oh, okay.
So I think in the near future, I'll have an article for the Northland Journal specifically on J.N. Webster.
So how come you're out in St. Paul? How come you're still interested in Barton history and Mr. Webster?
Well, I just find his images very fascinating, and I love the town's history. I just do a lot of reading on it and like writing for your magazine.
I was just typing up something, transcribing something, and it was about the stagecoaches that used to go to the Memphremagog house that burned in 1907.
Yeah.
And but then they were talking about there was the what was the big hotel in Barton?
Well, there was the Crystal Lake Hotel. There's the American Hotel.
No, I guess it was the Crystal Lake Hotel, and there used to be a real contest, or just between the Barton one, the Crystal Lake Hotel, and the Memphremagog house, that that they wanted the stagecoach to stop more at Crystal Lake or stay there longer. But they wanted the customers in Newport, and they even went as far as sabotaging each other's stagecoaches. And
oh my gosh!
And but it is kind of funny, like big hotels in both communities.
Well, even back in the early days, this area of the Northeast Kingdom was a big tourist destination.
Right. Yeah.
So people would come from the cities and from down country just to hang out for the summers on our lakes.
Right, and I think part of it is, well, first it was a stagecoach route, but then I don't know when the railroad arrived in Barton, but it arrived in Newport in 1863.
Yeah.
Right. And that really created a boom for any community along the rail line.
Exactly right. Yeah. Well, The railroad hit Barton in 1858.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it stopped there for many years. But all the boys going off to the Civil War came to Barton and caught the train, went down to Brattleboro for their training experience.
Right. And so when did he start taking his photos, Mr. Webster?
Well, you know, he was in the 15th Vermont Regiment, and I'm trying to figure out just exactly when he got interested in photography. I have a strong suspicion it was during his war service, because photographers would visit, you know, the encampments, take photographs, and you'd see all these pictures of Civil War veterans or soldiers. And I think that's when he first got exposed, no pun intended,
right,
to photography. And so when he was released, mustered out of the service in 1863, he came back to Barton, and he started advertising his photography business in 1864.
Now, what's your take? Because I've heard a lot. I've heard what I think is an accurate statement. Why do most people look so dour or even grumpy in some of these portraits?
Yeah. Well, that's a good. I'm not sure if they had a whole lot to be happy about, maybe.
Well, no, the other thing is it took a lot longer. It's like today it's snap and shoot. Right. I understand the early technology. Sometimes you had to
stay very still.
Yeah, and you had to stay there for quite the time. And by the time that it finally happened, it finally clicked, you were getting kind of crotchety.
Yeah, indeed. I think you probably were. And holding that pose for so long. Like one of the earliest photographs I have, I think it's probably the earliest one I have of J.N. Webster's, is a picture of his two brothers. I'll show it to you here. It's Albert Webster is on the left.
Right.
Ellery Webster is on the right. They're both in their Civil War uniforms, and I believe this photograph was taken in March of 1865, because Ellery had just been released from Andersonville prison, and his brother Albert was on a 30-day furlough, and I think that's when J.N. Webster took it. Now, his early photography was all about portraits and landscape. And so here's a picture of J.N. Webster himself.
Right.
When he, I think this is probably taken in about 1873. He was about 35 years old, but very dour looking, as you were pointing out. But still a very distinguished looking man. Right. He married in 1869 Mary Skinner, and of course you have to take a picture of your wife, and this is her photograph as well. She died giving birth to her first and only child, who also died at that same time in I think it was 1882. Anyway, in J.N. Webster's early business, he was all about portraits, and so he took pictures of kids, like this young chap sitting in front of a hassock or a small table.
Right.
Talk about your dour ladies. A lot of his portraits that I have, and I have over 150 of his images. A lot of the images, we don't know anything about these people, but I just find them to be extremely interesting, like this sourpuss lady.
you know though, that's a pet peeve of mine that even goes on today, and it even goes on in my own household.
Sure.
Is people take these great photos and they don't write anything on them.
Right.
And even if they're in a photo album, you think, well, that's, and you mark on the photo album what they are. But it's still kind of nice to write on the back of them, because you don't know when it's going to fall out. And right now you're saying to yourself, well, I'll recognize them. Well, you're not going to always be around, or maybe your brain cells get a little scattered and you just can't remember anymore.
4 generations later, nobody knows who it is.
And so it's so important. And I better listen to this. I better watch this show so I remind myself, because I'm so guilty of this. I'm going to get to it later.
Right.
But right on here.
Well, even J.N. Webster, a lot of his images have in his own handwriting what they are, and he kept a documentary of his images pretty well. For instance, this next portrait is in the home of it's entitled Mr. and Mrs. Green and Son. Don't know anything about him, but I thought it was a great image of a Barton family in their home, and you can see wall hangings and how they live. That's their sitting room.
Did you have you noticed in old photos, even out in the community, for the most part, people dressed up a lot more.
Yeah.
I don't mean everybody, and not everybody was there. They weren't in top hat and tails, but you, like in Newport, where I grew up and where I'm kind of fixated on, you'll see people fishing. You'll see amongst the traditional looking fishermen, you'll see these people. They have their sports coats on, their ties, and a hat, and everybody has a hat on of some kind.
Exactly.
And people seem to, if you, when you came over to visit, if you walked around town here, there's a few things when you see somebody with a suit on now, you think, well, that's really too bad. Who died?
Right.
Or are you a missionary for the Church of Latter-day Saints? Because, people still, now they're not accustomed to seeing suits all the time.
Exactly right.
Or when is your court date?
Yeah. Well, Webster was a snappy dresser. Every image I've ever seen of him was in a suit and tie, hat. But not only did he chronicle the lives of individuals in their portraits, but he was also a chronicler of everyday life in Barton. I brought a couple of images that would show just exactly that whole image.
And what is this one?
This is a picture of sugaring in Barton. So that's a sugar house. They're gathering sap. You see the horses. And Webster was very involved in photographing everyday life. Here's an image of the first day of school at Barton Academy.
So he was he might be compared to an earlier version of Harry and Alice Richardson.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
They came later, but for later decades, they recorded. They did portraits. That was their profession.
Right.
But then they would just go around and they would take pictures of streetscapes. They'd take pictures of gatherings,
Exactly
and
right.
it's people like Mr. Webster and the Richardsons who really captured a lot of our history.
Exactly right.
Like, what would Barton's photographic history look like if Mr. Webster had never decided to? Do you find many photos that are not contributed to him?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a whole line of photographers in Barton. After J.N. Webster, there was E.T. Wilson, but he did mostly portrait work. There was Walcott.
But would it be poorer if Mr. Webster hadn't been?
Yeah. In fact, as our first photographer, he was the one that was involved in the landscape. He took most pictures of things that were happening around town, buildings, not only the people.
Now, did he take any photos of what we would consider famous people during their time in Barton?
Well, I think he probably did. I mean, prominent businessmen.
Right.
Although I haven't been able to name a whole lot of those photographs yet.
Right.
But I keep searching for who in this photo is this individual.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I really like this picture of the first day of school at Barton Academy. This is the old, you probably remember this. This is the old gymnasium.
Actually, I was up north. My life centered about 5 miles, maybe south of Newport.
Yeah.
And probably you didn't venture up to the big city very often.
Just for movies.
Right.
Well, this Barton Academy was founded in the 1850s, and they built the schoolhouse. When the brick school was built and started construction in 1908, this became the gymnasium. And so when I grew up, we played basketball, had music lessons, everything in that gym. But here's a picture of it from the 1860s and all the school children out in front. He chronicled other incidents and special events in town. Like here's a picture of the baby fair.
Oh yeah,
you
wrote about that.
I wrote an article about the baby fair of 1875. It was part of the Orleans County Fair.
Right.
And here's a picture on the hill behind Floral Hall of all the babies that were involved in the baby fair.
And they decided not to actually judge them, right?
Yeah, for fear of offending some mother.
Right,
Yes.
because I wouldn't want to be a judge on a baby contest.
No.
Panel on a bet.
Not at all. Not at all. Oh well. Another image that I brought, Scott, is of a 4th of July celebration. These are kids, each one of them representing one of the states in the United States. They've got little caps with their state names on it. This is on the steps of the Seaver building, which was where the memorial building stands today, right on the town square.
Right. You're showing these pictures of students and that. Do you think when we were going to school, I know we had Mr. Emmerich.
Yeah.
Tom Emmerich.
Yeah.
He took photos. But then early days, a bit before me, but was the Richardsons. Do you think there's photos? Is there quite a few photos out there that they're going to, people like in 3 generations, that guy, that's Dan Taylor. Is there plenty of photos like this out there, but of our generation?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think where you'll find those kinds of photographs are in yearbooks, high school yearbooks. You don't see many photographs of just personalities in town anymore.
Right. That's it. And even like at least in Newport, every time you had a new board of aldermen, they would stand there in their suits and they would have a photographer take their photos, and that doesn't happen anymore.
I don't think so. In the digital age, you don't see many photographs of individuals anymore.
Well, if there's not a lot of photos of me around, people, my ancestors, my descendants, my descendants, they might start a myth that I was actually tall and handsome. And
well, the proof's here, huh?
But if there's no photos around, there's nobody to dispute it. So what's this?
I would never dispute that.
Yeah. So what's this picture of cemetery?
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of the earliest images of the town of Barton, the village of Barton. This is a picture of Welcome O'Brown Cemetery. You can see some of the monuments here. You can still go up and visit these monuments.
Where does that stand?
They're right in the front gate here.
But where is that?
Yeah, it's if you go up by Brown's Mill, Ian Brown and Son. If you go up West Street.
Okay.
It's right at the top of the hill.
Okay, all right.
So, but the thing I like about these images is that there's no trees. Now you walk through any village and it's laden with trees, but back then they used them for firewood, for
potash, and
building, everything.
But you do have that point. As you look at a lot of these old photos, like today you'll hear people say, "Oh, look, you're deforesting the state. There's no trees." Well, there's actually, we are a really forested state. If you look at old photos, we had once denuded almost the entire state of its trees.
It's true.
And so when you look around now, you're thinking,
there's more trees today than perhaps ever before.
Right.
Well, this is, I like this image of the cemetery because you can see one of the oldest houses in Barton. That's the Abbey May house.
Right.
When you come out of the state beach, it's the house that's right in front of you.
Now, what's this view? Well,
this is a great view of the village of Barton. It's somewhere around 1870. You can see he took this image from Breezy Hill. The street in front of you is Elm Street. You can see almost in the center of the photograph the Barton Academy, the first and oldest church, the Methodist Church. This it's now a brick building, but when this picture was taken, it was the old church. The Congregational Church is missing because that was built in 1874. So I date this photo about 1870. You can see the center of town just off to the left. That's where the square would be, center left. And then all this cluster of buildings on the extreme left would be where the old hotel used to stand. So I love this picture of Crystal Lake and the cliffs you can see in the back you know, when you look closely, you can see it very clearly.
So you must, when you come home, you must be awe-inspired when you look up over Crystal Lake and you see all beautiful metal wind towers. I don't think you weren't, that wasn't, when you saw those, considering you were used to seeing the way it was.
Pristine look, yes.
Did you feel all warm and fuzzy seeing those?
No, not really. But I have taken pictures of them because, like J.N. Webster, I want to be a chronicler of Barton's development.
Yeah, that's right. I understand this because I take photos of things that I don't really want to take photos of, but because it is part of the history.
Exactly, yeah.
So what about this photo?
Well, this is a nice photo of the top of what we call Mill Hill or Water Street. So that's the old Catholic church. It was built in 1842 and was a congregational church when it first started, but in the 1870s, the Congregationalists sold it to the Catholics and it became the Catholic Church. So picture this. This is right about where that church is standing would be right about where Barton Cleaners used to be at the top of the hill. So this is all the industry in town.
That's a hard thing to picture. Like that whole section, if I understand right, down through the Chronicle.
Yes.
That was all...
It was all industry.
Industry, and there's still people alive who remember some of those factories, and you know, Ray Griffin actually at the early days of World War II, before he went off to war, he worked in one of those factories, and it's just I find that hard to envision.
Well, envision this. This is a great photograph of that very area that you're talking about. This is a picture of Water Street.
Yeah.
You can see the rushing waters of the outlet of Crystal Lake. And this is all of the industry and the mills that ran alongside that outlet. There's a large, in fact, J.N. Webster labeled this lumber yard because that's the lumber yard for the Walter Hayward Chair Manufacturing Company. And right up at the extreme right-hand side of the photograph is where High Street, Main Street, Eastern Avenue all come together by the railroad tracks now.
Now, we grew up about the same generation. Actually, we did grow up in the same generation, just a few years apart. Mm-hmm. Did you ever watch Mr. Peabody and Sherman?
No.
Oh, you didn't? Mr. Peabody was the dog with a bow tie.
Really?
And then his boy Sherman. And they had the Wayback Machine.
Oh, yeah?
And they would go into this Wayback Machine and go back into time.
Cool.
And would you like to be able to go back into time and walk through some of these, walk through Barton to find out what it's really like?
I would absolutely love it. And in fact, if I was to pick a time, I would do it right at the turn of the 1900s, the last century. 1900, 1910, that was really the peak of Barton.
How accurate do you think, not just with Barton, but when we can no longer talk to people of a generation, like say like 1800s, late 1800s, how accurate do we, because we have a tendency to romanticize things too. Sure. Like I've interviewed people who grew up, with horse and buggies, but they're most, but not all, are gone now. But they kind of chuckle about things that we romanticize. Like, for example, one woman who was 104, and for the life of me, I can't remember her name, but she was associated with Barton and Orleans, and she said there was nothing romantic about riding in a wagon on a cold night.
I believe it.
And that you see some of these beautiful, almost gold-trimmed stagecoach,
Courier and Ive images.
And that wasn't, she assured me that was not what stagecoach travel was. That they weren't riding along and thinking, oh, this is so romantic.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would be terribly romantic either. But let me show you this next photo, Scott, because this is the village square in Barton at about 1878, 1880. So the buildings on the right-hand side, the last one in the row, right in the center of the photograph, is where the Snell Auto Parts store is now. The other buildings, they burned in 1885, and then the Pierce Block was built after that. So this is an image of some buildings. I think it's the only image that ever survived of the original buildings on that square. You can see on the left-hand side the Seaver Block, which is where that burned in 1927, 29, somewhere in there. And that's where the memorial building is now. But talk about your romanticism.
Right.
I mean, here's a horse and buggy in the center of the page. But to me, I love this image, but the town is dirty and dusty, and I'm not sure I'd enjoy living there.
No. Yeah, we really do romanticize a lot. And for some reason, I don't know, I can't really picture you on a horseback.
No, not me. Probably not.
But no, and it was harder living, according to today, because there are many people alive today who will tell you about just what it was like day-to-day living without, cause we pretty much grew up with a lot of luxuries,
Agreed.
We grew up with washing machines, running water,
refrigerators, microwaves.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of change, but compared to what other people, because like sometimes I kind of chuckle when I see Vermont brochures or Northeast Kingdom, and they show fireplaces as so romantic, but they don't show that you have to cut and split that wood, that you have to pile it, then let it dry, put it in the cellar. Because when I'm going down in the middle of the winter to stoke the fire, I'm not thinking this is romantic. I'm thinking this is work.
That's a lot of work, absolutely. Going back to this picture of the square, you can see the signs over the buildings. That's O.D. Owen. He was a clothier. H.C. Pierce was the drugstore owner of the time. But every business in town had the same signs that you can see there. J.N. Webster, in this next image, he was in the Nelson Block. Again, that's the block where Snell's Auto Parts is. His studios for photography and for his insurance was on the second floor of that building. And if you look closely in this picture, you can see his sign, J.N. Webster. And I was fortunate enough about 10 years ago to find that sign, and I purchased it, and now it hangs in my house.
Yeah, it hangs right in your house.
You were referencing earlier.
Now, do you? Your wife is from St. Paul.
She is.
Now, does she have her St. Paul stuff hanging around?
No, not at all. Because all the Barton memorabilia takes over.
Now, what's this building? By the way, haven't you noticed how beautiful some of the buildings were made?
Totally.
You look at this building.
Yeah, this is the Pierce Block, and it's still standing on the town square today. Kenny Drugstore is right where H.C. Pierce was, and it takes over the whole block. And the Orleans County Monitor was published on the second floor of that building, so it was a big industrial center for the village.
Now tell me, like in Newport right now, there's talk, actually it's going to happen.
Yes.
There's a block of buildings are being torn down.
Right.
And a lot of people were surprised that, because I do history, that I didn't protest it, because my take on it, just because something's old does not make it historic.
Correct.
As far as I'm concerned, that block of buildings, that's not historic. They've been retrofitted. They're not even that old, some of them aren't, but then they've been so just retrofitted. Do you agree that just because something's old doesn't make it historic?
No, I agree with that. I think our historic buildings need to be vetted through the National Register, for instance. If the Pierce Block were to be dismantled or burned, that would be a serious, severe loss for the town, for the village of Barton.
Here's a question: as we age, are we getting old or just historic?
We're getting historic.
That's it. So what's this building?
Well, again, J.N. Webster was a chronicler of history. And so this is the construction of the Congregational Church, which was completed in 1874. You can see the ox that are pulling in all the lumber, the men up on the rafters. And then he took images of the final product. This is the church as it stands today. But again, look behind the church. That hill is covered with trees and
Yeah, today it is.
Today it is, but not back then. You can see all the way up to Duck Pond Road. This is an image that J.N. Webster took of Water Street. Again, here's the Congregational Church, but Water Street, where the Chronicle office is, you got Brown's Mill at the top of the hill, goes right up that hill, and you can see, again, some of the industry, the Catholic Church at the top of the hill, the old one, not the one that was completed in 1902, but that's the old Catholic Church.
Now, what's this photo?
This photo is, it's of a railroad bridge somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I'm still trying to figure that out. It might be part of the underpass that is along Lincoln Avenue or Prospect Street up Harrison Avenue. You can see some houses on the left, but again, here's a lot of construction going on in Barton, and that's what J.N. Webster was trying to chronicle. He also took pictures of just individual homes. Here's a picture of a home somewhere in town. I don't know if it's still standing. If any of your viewers know what house this is, I'd appreciate knowing. But he took pictures of lots of different buildings.
And you know, a lot of times with the buildings, have you, in Barton, are there any buildings or even like cluster of buildings that are built in areas that you look today as being kind of strange, like say hillsides? It's like, for example, is around Prouty's Bay in Newport, that whole hillside is filled with houses.
It's all developed now.
And no, but it was at the time because they were built but they were built on real steep ground. It was because it was mill workers' housing, so they kept them close to work, and so some areas have buildings where you're thinking, well, why would they build there? There must be some areas of Barton that they built mill houses for people.
I would think so. I'm not familiar with what kinds of developments were taking place and for what reasons, but certainly, when you look at the State Beach, that whole bathhouse was built by the CCC, in the 1930s. So, lots of different things. This is one of my favorite images, Scott, of Crystal Lake in the 1870s. Big lumber industry. You can see the outlet filled with logs. But again, the next series of photographs are all of that general vicinity of Crystal Lake and the outlet. Here's one that shows some barns and fences and the cliffs of Crystal Lake. But these are really old images and some of the very earliest pictures of Barton.
You ought to superimpose those wind towers on them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, you can't see that hill in any of these. J.N. Webster was not only a photographer, but he was an artist. And so he took this picture of Crystal Lake and these buildings in this next image, and he called this image dandelions. Even though it's not in color, there's a whole field of dandelions in front. And so he was not only a photographer of people and buildings, but he was an artist. Now,
and those are the falls.
This is the falls. Excuse me, at the outlet of Crystal Lake. These are the falls underneath the gristmill. The next two images show just how powerful those waterfalls are. And even today, they're talking about hydroelectric electricity coming out of those falls. And I think if you were to study some of these pictures, you could see exactly where the capability is there for electricity to come out of that water.
Now, what's this? Is that E.M. Brown?
No, but it's a building that would be just to the west of E.M. Brown. That was the old grist mill, and the millstone was turned by the falls of Crystal Lake.
Now, do you think, we love looking at these old photos, and it was a lot more of a challenge back in the old days to take photos. It took a long time. Today we can go, everybody has a camera. They're on your phone.
Exactly.
But do you think there's enough being taken of just these general landscapes? Like I look at postcards of yesterday.
Sure.
and they captured streetscapes. They captured things happening. And you look at today's postcards, they might be pretty,
right,
but there are a lot of times there are animals, of a moose standing in a mud wall.
Right.
You know, I just don't envision them as having any historical significance in the future. But do you think there are landscape photos being taken? Because wherever I go,
yeah,
I try to remind myself just to take some landscape photos
of those landscapes.
Or streetscapes.
Right. Well, I've seen some of those images that you've taken on your website, and there's not enough of that going on at all, in my opinion. The postcards of 100 years ago were much more historic in their nature than they are today. You're absolutely right.
So what about this?
Well, I brought this one especially for you. Do you recognize any of this?
That is that Newport?
That's Main Street in Newport.
Main Street in Newport.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause that's the Meant for Magog house right on the right, which was, you know, what's funny is we talk about history, but we have plans for this large lakefront hotel.
Yes.
People think, wow, this is the first time we've had a lakefront hotel. This housed several hundred people.
Exactly right.
And it burned in 1907.
Yeah.
And actually, I have an article about it in I think it will be in the October issue of the Journal, and about the fire that destroyed it in 1907.
Fantastic! Yeah. Well, here's a picture from the lakeside of the Meant for Magog house.
And who doesn't recognize? You know, if you live in Newport and you don't recognize the Lady of the Lake, there's
exactly right.
Lady of the Lake is even on their state seal.
Wow.
Not state seal, city seal.
City seal. Yeah.
Wow. It was, you know, the Lady of the Lake eclipses the two tour boats we have now.
Yeah, but those tour boats are really fun. I was out on Lake Meant for Magog last week.
They're great. It's great to have them come back.
Yes.
But the sheer scale
they would pale in comparison.
These massive, this one, the Lady of the Lake, I can't remember how many hundreds of people you had on that ship.
Yeah. Well, I brought these two images of Newport just for you because J.N. Webster was not only a photographer for Barton, but he took images. You know, I've found them of Owl's Head in Canada, Knowlton's Landing up on Lake Meant for Magog at the base of Owl's Head. He went as far south as Dartmouth College and White River Junction, and taking images all over the place. So he was a regional photographer as well as a Barton photographer. And then this last photograph that I brought for you today is one of my favorite images of J.N. Webster. He had a camp on the backside, on the east side of Crystal Lake. Mm-hmm. And in the background you can see a lake, and I just envisioned that he was out hunting and fishing. You can see an old reel and basket for fish. He's got his gun. He's got his hunting dog right next to him, but he's camping there for enjoyment, and that's what Barton is all about. It's come to Barton, camp, hunt, fish, do the touristy things, and some of that lives on today.
You know, today as we record, it's Wednesday, I believe, August 14th.
Yes.
Barton Fair.
Barton Fair is starting today.
You're over from St. Paul. You're going to be heading back in a few days. Are you going to be hitting up the Barton Fair?
Absolutely. We go every year.
And why do you go every year?
You know, some of it is nostalgic for me because I enjoyed the Barton Fair as a kid. We lived on Park Street, so we'd go to the fair every day, all day. But for me, it's for my 9-year-old son Joshua. He loves the Barton Fair, you know. So we'll go play some games and look at the animals in the barn. You
know, the funny thing is, what I remember about the Barton Fair, and the people sneaking in. And no, I don't think they really had to sneak in, but it seemed to me like it was more like of a game.
Right.
You know, like how many people you could put in the trunk of a car. Yeah. And I remember for a period of time, back when I was in high school, not that I did it, 'cause I don't think I ever snuck in, but I do remember hearing stories that because there were indentions underneath the fence where people would go under.
Yeah, it's true.
And occasionally a farmer would go over and just slip in some manure in the trench, and so when people slipped through, they probably didn't want to stay at the fair after that.
They would remember that, I'm sure.
And so you know, the first thing that comes to people's minds when I talk about growing up going to the Barton Fair.
What's that?
What is the one thing you hear about the Barton? Think about it, the seedier side of the Barton.
The girly shows. Yeah, the hoochie coochie tents.
And you know what's, and I mean this seriously, I want to write a piece on that, or you.
Yeah.
Because whether it's I look at it as kind of a sad chapter of the fair's history, but whether it's sad or not,
everyone remembers it.
Everybody remembers it, and history. History is neither good nor bad. It's just history,
right?
And it should be recorded. So maybe next year you can do an expose on the history of the hoochie coochie shows.
Well, let me say emphatically that I have no experience with the girly shows at Barton Fair. So
you just knew you weren't supposed to go down in that direction.
That's right. Never even ventured there. Right. So.
All right, as we wrap up, the Barton of your youth, or the Barton, particularly of the Barton of, say, your parents' youth, it isn't the same anymore.
No.
Can Barton return to at least some grandeur that it once had?
Oh, I think so. I mean, just look at the natural beauty of Barton. Crystal Lake is its past, its present, and I believe Crystal Lake is going to be part of its future. Barton just needs to reinvent itself as a destination for tourism, fishing, recreation, and I think some of the best days of Barton may still be in its future.
And what about having Dan Taylor and his wife and 2 sons move there and spearhead this?
Yeah.
Now, if you went home and told your wife, say, "Hey, guess what? We're moving to Northern."
Yeah. I think a place in Barton might be in the works for my retirement, but not in the foreseeable future.
A lot of people think we're cold. They think we're snowy, and I've been over to your place.
Yeah.
And
in winter,
you guys, but that winter still might be in June.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, I remember landing. I think we were the last airplane to land one time, and I'd never seen so many cars off the road as over there. But
we have rugged weather too. So
you do.
It's just in our blood.
Actually, in the wintertime, I can usually judge what we're going to have for the weather in about 2 days, because I look over and see what you have, and every once in a while I give you a call.
It's pretty accurate, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. It doesn't seem to go the weather pattern doesn't seem to go that way in the summer, though. It seems to be more the winter. It seems to come across.
I think you're right.
So is there anything in your sons, even though they didn't grow up here, do you ever see is there anything Barton in them? I know your youngest son. He's a little Ad Taylor.
Yeah,
he looks like, because your father was on this show just a few weeks ago as a Korean War veteran.
Correct. Yeah.
But so your son looks like him.
Joshua looks like my father.
But then your oldest boy though, how tall are you?
I'm 5'7".
And were you ever thin like a beanpole?
No.
And there's your son.
Yeah.
He's what, 15?
He's 15 years old, 6'3", size 15 shoe.
Probably 100 pounds?
If we're lucky, yeah. Yeah, no.
I take it he takes after his mother's family.
Absolutely. Yes.
So when are you coming back?
Oh,
every year you come. Every year you return.
Yes.
You come on to either my radio show or my TV show. What's the topic for next year?
Oh boy. Well, we'll just have to stay tuned.
Yeah. All right. Well, what more do you have to tell the viewers as we wrap up?
Well, it was my pleasure to be here today and to talk about J.N. Webster. For me, he's one of the unsung heroes of Barton's history. and I just wanted to sing his praises for a few moments today. You know, when he passed away, he died on New Year's Eve of 1920. And when he passed away, he left his whole estate to two organizations. One was the Brick Church, the Methodist Church, and the other one was the Women's Literary Society. And from that spawned the Barton Library. He left a $6,000 endowment, and 6 years later, they built the library.
You know, that reminds me of something is, you know what the trouble that I run into a lot of times is, there's a lot of older people who they don't know where to give their historic photos to, because they said a lot of them feel that their kids don't appreciate it, because the thing is that a lot of times history, the love of history, it doesn't come until later on.
Right.
And there's a lot of history just thrown away. It's just thrown.
Agreed. Yes.
And it's like we do have some, like Barton has a great historical society.
Yes.
Derby does. Newport is filled with history, but even Newport doesn't have a true historical society. Even though I think in the coming years that'll change with all that's going on, but. So, you know, people do struggle on what to do with this stuff.
Yeah, well, your local historical societies are a great place to deposit your mementos, absolutely.
Right. All right, Dan, I got to thank you for, I think you're going to be remembered in the history of Barton too, because we can talk about all that Mr. Webster did.
Sure.
But you're also playing a very important role in helping to preserve it. And, you know, it would be nice if the Taylor family would settle back in and you could maybe work closer to home about doing this.
Sure.
But from St. Paul, that's okay, too.
I can enjoy Barton's history from afar.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for coming on the show.
It was really my pleasure.
And next time, I've had your father on.
Yeah.
I've had you on. And so the next one will have to be your mother.
Okay, I'll let her know.
All right.
Very good.
And thank you for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.